Sorcerer, far have you wandered?
You are courting pain and death.
What is going on, my fellow nerds? OperatorOtter here. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and with this video, it gets just a little bit better. Today, we'll be discussing the Frozen Orb Sorc. This is an S-Tier Sorc build that absolutely excels at all content in the game and demolishes Tier 8 hordes, but most importantly, it is, in my humble opinion, the most fun build in the Sorc's arsenal. This build uses the new Fractured Winterglass to spawn an absolutely absurd amount of conjurations that empower our Frozen Orbs and Lightning Spears to decimate everything in our path and leave a wake of frozen destruction. Now, I know what you're thinking. Otter, if this build uses Lightning Spear, what makes it different than the Shakuna two-handed pure Lightning Spear build? The answer to that is that the Shakuna build uses Frozen Orbs to empower the Lightning Spears, and this build goes the opposite direction in using the Lightning Spears to empower the Frozen Orbs. Now, is this build better than the Shakuna build? No. But it is still able to output about 75% of that build's DPS value while attacking at a blistering speed and blading the screen and Frozen Orbs that gives an extremely satisfying and fun style of play. In this video, we'll be discussing how to gear this build from just getting Fractured Winterglass all the way to the Giga Damage Uber version. Important breakpoints and gameplay rotations to teach you how to play the build optimally. So without further ado, let's get started. Let's start with understanding the pillars of how the build functions, as it will scaffold in understanding why we build each variant the way we do. The three pillars to the Frozen Orb Sorc are as follows. 1. Understanding Conjuration Mastery. 2. Importance of attack speed. 3. Importance of cooldown reduction. The entire build revolves around the concept of understanding what Conjuration Mastery does, and then using attack speed and cooldown reduction to throw that concept into the stratosphere. Conjuration Mastery is a passive that states you gain X damage, X movement speed, and X mana regeneration for each active conjuration, where X is the amount of points allocated to Conjuration Mastery. Let's imagine we had 10 total ranks to Conjuration Mastery, and we were able to get 10 conjurations out at the same time. This would mean that we would get plus 10 multiplicative damage to all of our damage, plus 10% movement speed, and plus 20% mana generation for each active conjuration, but we have 10 conjurations out. So what this actually means is we get 100% multiplicative damage, 100% movement speed, and 200% mana generation. So what does this do for our build? Well, the damage multiplier is just that, more damage, easy enough. The bonus movement speed does allow us to be very fast and move quickly, which is nice, but the real power comes in its synergy with Asu's Heirloom, which states our critical strike chance is increased by 40% of our total bonus movement speed. You can have 100% max bonus movement speed, and with the example we just stated, that means we get the max value of 40% critical strike chance just by casting spells. Yeah, we don't need to evade or anything else to get the max value other than that. We just cast spells and we get a free 40% critical strike chance. That's neat. The bonus mana generation helps us spam Frozen Orb without needing anything to regenerate mana once we get our conjuration count high enough. Now, as you start gearing this build, you won't be able to do so purely through the conjuration count, but there is a way around that we will talk about later. So in conclusion, what does Conjuration Mastery do for us? Big damage. Now, what if I told you we can get plus 30 conjurations out and maintain that amount during our duration in combat? Well, now we're getting somewhere, and that is exactly what we can do. Now, to understand how we can get that amount of conjurations, we first need to talk about how Fractured Winterglass functions. Fractured Winterglass has two important facets that play into spawning conjurations. The first is the affix that states conjuration cooldowns are reduced by X seconds when a Frozen Orb explodes, where X is the roll and the masterworking allocation on the item. Let's say we had 0.4 second roll here. That would mean that when my Frozen Orb goes out and explodes, my conjuration cooldowns are reduced by 0.4 seconds. Easy enough. Let's amp that up by quite a bit. Let's combine this with the Frozen Orbit aspects that states that your Frozen Orb explodes 2 additional times at 60% damage. Well, now this means that when I cast Frozen Orb, it will explode and reduce the conjuration cooldown by 1.2 seconds, because there are 3 total explosions per orb. Now let's amp that up again and give ourselves the ability to double cast Frozen Orb at 3 attacks per second, but the second part of Fractured Winterglass is intrinsic, stating that your conjurations have a 90% chance on a lucky hit to launch a Frozen Orb at a nearby enemy. And now what happens is you can launch 16 Frozen Orbs a second, and each reduces the cooldown of your conjurations by 1.2 seconds each, meaning you can get your conjuration cooldowns reduced by 19.2 seconds every second. But they only have a 10-second cooldown. Well, then this means that you can cast your conjurations twice per second, and they last for 7.2 seconds. Yeah. The second part of Fractured Winterglass that makes more conjurations is the first part of the intrinsic that states that casting a Frozen Orb has a 65% chance to spawn a random conjuration when it explodes. Now this requires that you cast the Frozen Orb. so the double cast and the Conjuration spawning extra Frozen Orbs cannot go into effect here. But your initial Frozen Orb that explodes can spawn a Conjuration each time it explodes, meaning the faster you attack, the more Conjurations you can get out. So if attacking faster means more Conjurations, that multiplies our damage because of Conjuration Mastery, then how fast can we attack? And that segues us right into the next pillar. The next pillar is the importance of attack speed and the understanding the breakpoints. As stated before, the faster we attack, the more Conjurations we can get out, and we are applying our damage faster, which in turn creates a second degree polynomial exponential scalar in the stat of attack speed. TLDR, attack speed important. So what are attack speed breakpoints? Well, I don't want to get too complicated here, but essentially the attack speed bonus you have does not convert 1-to-1 in the game because the game operates like an old school movie where it essentially is a collection of frames bundled together quickly. And this means if you wanted to see a difference between 51% and 51.5% attack speed, then the game would need to operate at 1000 frames per second in terms of the server refresh rate. But it doesn't. It operates on 60 frames per second, meaning we can have large gaps of attack speed variances that do absolutely nothing to actual attack speed in the game. In order to see actual differences, we have to bypass a specific mark that lowers the amount of frames rendered for the specific skill, and this is called an attack speed breakpoint. So what are the attack speed breakpoints? Well, I want to shout out Gold Farming Guide for providing an extensive list of all the Sorc's abilities and the attack speed breakpoints tied to them. I will leave that link in the description below. Shout out to you, good sir, you are a god among men. But here are the attack speed breakpoints for Frozen Orb. The frames is the literal amount of frames needed to render the ability, and the attack speed percentage is the amount of attack speed needed to meet that frame requirement. Now let's take a look at 23 frames and 22 frames. You will see that you need 85.9% attack speed for 23 frames and 94.4% attack speed for 22 frames. Now let's say that you had 94.3% attack speed. How many frames would we be attacking at? Yep, we are still tied to 23 frames, meaning that extra 9% attack speed you just gave yourself did absolutely nothing to how fast you are actually attacking. So it's vital that we meet these breakpoints, but then try not to go any percent over so that we can allocate our gear stats and masterworking somewhere else without it being a wasted stat. For this build, we really don't need to start paying attention to attack speed breakpoints until we get to the one specially highlighted here, which is the 79.4% attack speed breakpoint without an Elixir of Advantage drink. The other attack speed breakpoint shown when the elixir has been drank will already be met if you have the 79.4% attack speed breakpoint. When you hit this breakpoint, this now means that when you activate Unstable Currents, you will reach the 20 frames attack speed breakpoint, meaning you literally attack 3 times per second, and this will throw your conjuration limit to the plus 30 conjurations as stated before, but only if we have enough cooldown reduction, which segues us right into the next pillar. Isn't this fun and organized? The next pillar then is the importance of cooldown reduction. Now for cooldown reduction, there isn't necessarily any breakpoints per se, because we cannot achieve 100% uptime on unstable currents through cooldown reduction alone, but we can get our cooldown reduction high enough with other facets of the build that will be discussed later that will allow for 100% uptime on unstable currents. Really what cooldown reduction is doing is giga buffing our mobility, defense, and damage. Cooldown reduction will directly affect our teleport, allowing us to Scooty McScooter our way across the map. It will also affect defense by lowering the cooldown of our teleport and ice armor, which both give us barriers and damage reduction through the use of the shimmering teleport. Lastly, it giga improves our damage output by lowering teleport's cooldown, which makes us unstoppable and turning on Tybalt's will if you decide to run that variant, but also lowers ice armor's cooldown to a point where we can upkeep permanent uptime on ice armor. And fun fact, Ice Armor's barrier counts as a separate barrier, which applies another application of Aspect of Stormswell for an additional 30% multiplier on top of the standard 30% multiplier from our protection passive. Yes, it double dips. Ain't that cool? But the real power of cooldown reduction is what it does to our conjuration cooldowns. When we achieve 50% cooldown reduction, our conjurations can be cast twice as often, meaning we can get many more conjurations out that multiply our damage through our conjuration mastery passive. TLDR, cooldown reduction importante. These three pillars combined are going to create the foundational concept of one thing: maximizing how many conjurations we can get out. When we first started playing this build, we started noticing a problem with it through what felt like a disparity in the ratio between casting conjurations and casting Frozen Orb. When we cast a conjuration, this interrupts the cast frame of Frozen Orb, and this means if we get our conjuration cooldown so low that we are able to giga spam them, this would inherently lower the amount of Frozen Orbs we were able to cast within a given time frame. The issue here is that Frozen Orb is about 70% of our damage output, so by getting out an extra 6 conjurations, but also lowering how many orbs we could get out by what felt like about 30%, this would actually net us out less damage. So I set out on a quest to figure out how many Frozen Orb casts we lost by getting higher and higher values on the conjuration cooldown on Frozen Orb Explosion Intrinsic on Fractured Winterglass at the 22 and 20 frame attack speed breakpoints respectively, and the findings are actually going to surprise you. On the top portion here is where I tested different Conjuration cooldown rolls on Fractured Winter Glass with the 22 and 20 attack speed breakpoints respectively. And what we see is a general trend in the increase in total Conjurations we can get out with faster attack speed and lower Conjuration cooldowns. So far so good, everything is making sense. The bottom portion is displaying the amount of Frozen Orb cast I was able to get off in 10 seconds per cooldown roll on Fractured Winter Glass at the 20 and 22 frame breakpoint. What we see here is that even though we are increasing how many Conjuration casts we are getting off as illustrated from the top portion, the total amount of Frozen Orb cast we get off does not change at all regardless of how many Conjurations we are able to get off. What? I have theories as to what's happening here with interrupt flag timers on the frame animations of Frozen Orb, but that's not important to the video. What this shows is that it actually doesn't matter how low the cooldowns are on the Conjurations, we will always output the same amount of Frozen Orbs within this 10-second time frame. The next part is an even deeper journey into Looney Tunes land. I decided to run a Tal Rosh's ring and achieve the 22 frame attack speed breakpoint with unstable currents active, because the argument here was that Tal Rosh's gives bigger base damage multiplier, and Tal Rosh's gives more global cooldown reduction, which means more Conjurations. So if I was able to output around 19 Frozen Orb casts while also maintaining around 28 Conjurations, then this would mean Tal Rosh's was actually the better option due to the fact that it has a higher base damage multiplier. But what we see here is that even with the same attack speed, we get less Frozen Orb cast off, and with a higher amount of global cooldowns, we get off less Conjurations? What? Huh? How? I don't even know where to begin to explain this. And I had to double back on this about 20 times in testing to confirm this because it just did not make sense. But yeah, this is the data. It's absolutely mind-blowing. So for anyone who's watching this video and comments, but Tal Rosh's, no. Okay, moving on. One last thing before we get into the different builds and variants. Now that we know lower cooldown Conjurations does not affect how many Frozen Orb casts we can get off, what is the optimal masterworking path for Fractured Winter Glass? Because if we can cast more Conjurations, then maybe that will give us more damage than just triple critting Conjuration Mastery in the Fractured Winter Glass. So what we see here is the combination of Fractured Winter Glass base rolls being greater or non-greater affects, and simply put, a triple crit into Conjuration Mastery netted out the highest damage multiplier regardless of the roll. So just try to triple crit Conjuration Mastery. But if that's not an option right now, then look for the next best option in the chart here and go with that. So far, so good. I know it's a lot of information, but the game train stops for no one, so let's get into the build in different variants. In the planner located in the description below, there are multiple steps and variants to this build depending on where you are in the gearing journey or how you want to play. I'm not going to go into detail and read off every single piece of gear for every variant because you all know how to read, and I don't want to make this video 45 minutes long. So what I will do instead is talk about the concept of each variant and the important pieces that make it work. Let's start with step 1, which is where you just got Fractured Winter Glass and nothing else in terms of uniques or ubers. The main problem most players are going to find here is the mana generation and being able to spam Frozen Orb. The way that we fix this is by running Aspect of Prodigy in one of our rings and the Frigid Breeze passive in our skill tree. Yes, Frozen Orb has a very low lucky hit chance, but because it deals so many instances of damage per cast, its lucky hit chance is actually a little bit more reliable than face value. So as seen here, I have no ubers or uniques with a fresh 0 out of 12 Masterwork Fractured Winter Glass with a single mana generation roll in my chest. All I need to do is cast my Conjurations on cooldown and voila! Perma Frozen Orb stand. Once we get all our cooldown reduction high enough, we will not need Aspect of the Prodigy, but this is a powerful way to solve this problem. For steps 2.1 and 2.2, we'll be adding Asu's Heirloom Boots, Tal Rosh's Ring, and either Tybalt or Axial Conduit Pants with 8 out of 12 Masterwork on all of our gear. Asu's will drastically increase our crit hit chance because Conjuration Mastery increases our movement speed, which will synergize here. Tal Rosh's will give us a strong 60% multiplier and some important CDR for all of our skills. Now this is where you as the player may have a choice as to whether wear Tybalts or Axial Conduit for your pants. Tybalts will give you more damage and a better resource management with its synergy on Teleport, which makes you unstoppable. Axial Conduit gives a large amount of damage reduction, which will make you much harder to kill. But depending on how you want to play, those are the best options. For Masterworking, we'll be prioritizing cooldown reduction, attack speed, Conjuration Mastery, and chance to double cast Frozen Orb. This will help transition us into the next step. For step 3.1 and 3.2, this is the endgame Uber version with 12 out of 12 Masterworks on all the gear, and I do want to spend a little more time on this one in terms of the affix, Masterwork, and Temper selection. Let's get started. Step 3.1 is the current version I run and is specifically designed to deal as much damage as humanly possible while being just barely tanky enough to survive all content in the game. The thought process is, the best defense is a good offense. Just kill the things that can kill you before they can deal damage and no problem, right? For our helm, we'll run Shaco with a triple crit into the cooldown reduction with a Topaz socketed. It's a ludicrously high amount of a powerful stat that will lower all of our skills' cooldowns, and each skill has a vital role in the build. For our chest piece, we'll run Tyrael's Might with a triple crit into the damage reduction with 2 Topazes socketed. This abomination is able to give us 40% 10% damage reduction and 11% max resistance to all of our resistances. Literally wild of a defensive option. For our glows, we will run legendary glows with a greater affix of intelligence, greater affix of ranks of Frozen Orb, and attack speed with a critical strike damage temper and lucky hit to freeze or stun temper. We will masterwork once into intelligence and twice into Frozen Orb ranks. For the aspect, we will run Frozen Orbit. The reason we don't need to crit attack speed is because we will get this elsewhere to put us just past the breakpoint for attack speed. We don't triple crit Frozen Orb because ranks to Frozen Orb only affects Frozen Orb, and intelligence affects all of our damage, including our spears. With the amount of ranks in Frozen Orb that we have, an extra rank will give us less damage than what intelligence will do due to the rule of diminishing returns. We run crit damage tempers because it turns directly into a multiplier for our lightning spear damage, and it isn't a bad option for our Frozen Orbs either, considering we have 90% crit hit chance. The chance to freeze or stun tempers is to help with the staggering of the bosses as we deal nearly double damage against crowd control targets. For our pants, we'll run Tybalts with a triple crit into life and 2 topazes socketed. Damage on pants. It's strong, and its synergy with a very low cooldown teleport might as well be a permanent 20% multiplier to our damage because teleport makes us unstoppable. For our boots, we'll run Asu's Heirloom with a triple crit into crit hit damage. These boots will just give us 40% crit hit chance, which is kind of absurd, but as well, the crit hit damage is a direct multiplier to our spears. For our main hand, we'll run a wand with greater affix and intelligence, crit hit damage, and maximum life with a double cast Frozen Orb and crit hit damage temper and an emerald socketed. For the aspect, we'll run Shredding Blades. If possible, we want to triple crit the chance to cast Frozen Orb, but triple critting on legendary gear is incredibly hard because you have 5 options instead of 4. So because of that, I'd say just go for the double crit into Frozen Orb and 1 into crit hit damage. For our amulet, we will run our glorious Lord and Savior, Fractured Winterglass, with God willing, a greater affix in Conjuration Mastery and a triple crit into Conjuration Mastery with a diamond socketed. As explained previously, triple crit Conjuration Mastery nets us the most damage, but you could double crit Conjuration Mastery and single hit Conjuration cooldowns. The reason we choose diamond in the gear is that we will already be armor capped, but there is a curse in Hordes that will reduce your resist by 10%, so now you can take that without fear of reducing your resistances. For Ring 1, we will run Ring of Starless Skies with a double crit into attack speed and a single crit into either core skills or critical strike chance with a diamond socketed. Core skills or critical strike chance are within 0.1% of a damage gain, so either will work. But it is vital that we are able to double crit into attack speed so that we can meet the 79.4% attack speed breakpoint. For Ring 2, we will run a legendary ring with greater affix attack speed, greater affix intelligence, and critical strike chance with an unstable currents cooldown temper and a critical strike damage temper and aspect of splintering with a diamond socketed. Prepare yourselves, because this triple crit will be harder to hit than Shaco or Fractured Winterglass. But if you want to absolutely optimize your build path, you must triple crit the attack speed. If you don't, you can dead attack speed by double critting in your gloves or triple critting attack speed in Ring of Starless Skies, but either of those options are suboptimal. Still, this breakpoint is the most important thing you should be going for in the entire build. The unstable currents temper will help with unstable currents uptime, and the crit damage will scale the spheres. For our offhand, we will run a focus with greater affix intelligence, greater affix critical strike chance, and cooldown reduction with a double Frozen Orb cast temper and critical strike damage temper and an emerald socketed with aspect of Stormswell. We will double crit chance to cast Frozen Orb twice and single crit cooldown reduction. If possible, you want to triple crit chance to cast Frozen Orb twice, but like the wand, that is a rough venture. For our skills, we will run Ice Armor, Teleport, Ice Blades, Unstable Currents, Lightning Spear, and Frozen Orb with Frozen Orb and Firebolt enhancements. Skill Tree and Paragon can be found in the planner. For the Paragon, there are 2 options depending on the content you are doing. The difference is the utilization of either the Control Glyph or the Unleash Glyph. Control gives a large multiplier to crowd control targets, which is very powerful in Hordes and low pits, but loses value in Tormented bosses and pit pushing. For those, we want to run Unleash for the flat multiplier and damage. The way this build works is that we use overflowing energy with static discharge to lower the cooldowns of our Teleport, Lightning Spear, and Unstable Currents. Lower Teleport means more damage, mobility, and defense because of the Shimmering Teleport. Lightning Spear is more damage because of Splintering, but also more Conjurations for Conjuration Mastery. Unstable Currents means faster attack speed and more Conjurations. For step 3.2, this is Lurkin's Frozen Orb build, so shout out to you, sir. Make sure to check out his YouTube as well as drop a subscription to a fellow theory crafter and friend. This variant of the build is mega tank. It is so hard to die in this variant of the build, but it does deal less damage. Still, the number 1 damage loss is dying. 10 quadrillion times 0 is still 0. So if you're just learning how to play this build or in a state where you just want to chill and farm with 5 IQ dedicated to Diablo 4, this is definitely the variant I would recommend. There are a couple of differences in this variant, so let's get started. The first is that we will replace Tybalt's Will with Axial Conduit for more damage reduction. We will then replace Ice Blade on our skill bar with Flame Shield and Firebolt enhancement with Ice Blade enhancement. In the skill tree, we'll swap Overflowing Energy with Veer's Mastery for more damage reduction. We will then take all points out of Static Discharge and Icy Touch and a point out of Supreme Unstable Currents and allocate them as such. touch. 1 into Hydra, 1 into Enhanced Hydra, 1 into Summon Hydra, 1 into Coursing Currents, and 3 into Electrocution. For the Paragon Glyphs, we replace Control and Charge with Unleash and Reinforce for even more damage reduction. What this now does is gives the player a bonus 50% damage reduction. The way this build upkeeps Unstable Currents is by utilizing the Ice Blades enhancement, which will spawn 3 more Ice Blades to help reduce the cooldown of Unstable Currents. This build will apply a burning effect to the targets to turn on Devouring Blades by the use of the Hydras spawned from Fractured Winterglass. Like I said, this variant does do less damage, but is way more tanky and much more friendly to newer players or those who just want to go brain dead while farming hordes. Last thing to go over before I let you go is understanding what each skill can do in certain scenarios and when to utilize them for gameplay expertise. Let's start with Ice Armor. Ice Armor is a defensive skill that gives a large barrier to help with defense, but it also causes the Stormswell aspect to double dip, meaning that if the barrier is active, you actually get a 66% damage multiplier from Stormswell. Because of this, try to time it when you use it against Aether Fiends, Hellborn, or bosses during stagger cycles to get the most out of the damage it can give. Teleport is a strong mobility skill, but it also gives a lot of defensive power through Shimmery Teleport. If you are running the variant with Tybalt, it also gives mana and a 20% damage multiplier buff for 5 seconds. Use this right before an Aether Fiend spawns or into an Hellborn pact. You can also use this against a boss during its stagger cycle. Unstable Currents is just a press on cooldown with the Step 3.1 variant. With Step 3.2, try to time it against Aether Fiends and stagger cycles on bosses. For Ice Blades and Lightning Spear, there is a caveat here. You can only have a maximum of 3 Ice Blades active from you casting them. You can in total have 9 Ice Blades active via 3 from you, 3 from Ice Blades Enhancement, and 3 from Fractured Winterglass. Lightning Spear does not have a Conjuration limit, so spam away. But for Ice Blades, try to only press this ability once every 2 to 3 seconds. If you spam it, it will take a current Ice Blade away from a target that is attacking, which is lowering your cooldowns. So try to control how you spam Ice Blades. Lastly, Frozen Orb. Honestly, just grab a piece of tape and hold that sucker down the entire time. That's all I have for you. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like on the video. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask in the comments below or in my Discord and stream, with which there's a link in the description below. If you are feeling extra generous, please feel free to subscribe for all future content. Have yourself a wonderful day and enjoy blasting away the hordes of hell. Operator Otter, out.